So let's talk about tonight's topic, which is on codependency and people pleasing. So let's define what it is. And when I was researching this topic, it's actually turned out to be a lot more complex and in depth than I thought it would be. So let's take a look at its origin and development over the years and see how it has been defined. So it first started in 1940s with Dr. Karen Horney when she was describing a neurotic personality types found mainly in women who define themselves through the dependency or approval of others, which she called they were suffering from the tyranny of the should. So by this time, the term codependency haven't come to term yet. Then later on, furthermore, down to the 40s and 50s, this term started coming about as it was derived from the term co-alcoholics from studies of Al-Anon groups for friends and family, which mainly comprises of wives of alcoholic men who enable them and interfere with their recovery. Then come the 1980s, where the topic and the concept become more mainstream with self-help books for relationship and love addicts who conflate obsession and torment for a man as love. And two of the books that were made very popular during this time, one of them was called Women Who Love Too Much, When You Keeping Wishing and Hoping He'll Change by Robin Norwood. And the other one is Codependent No More by Melody Beattie. Then come to 1986, we have Dr. Timon Cermak, which is a psychiatrist, and he wrote the paper, The Diagnostic Criteria for Codependency, and he proposed it to include in the DSM as a personality disorder, but it was rejected. So as of right now, codependency is not considered as a personality disorder. It's still mainly most people become aware of it through the addiction and I would say the medical model, in the medical model, but it really didn't quite explain too much of it. So what is it really about, right? What we've been talking about, it has been kind of defined in terms of the problem out there having to do with other people, certain behavioral pattern, which is very true. But then as we come into 1980s, coming into 90s and forward, there were some different definitions now that go beyond the original concept in addiction. And some of the experts at the National Conference in Scottsdale, Arizona, give us a working definition for it, which now they describe as a pattern of painful dependency on compulsive behaviors and an approval from others in an attempt to find safety, self-worth, and identity. So the focus now start looking more inward, like what's actually going on with that person themselves. What is this codependency is attempting to solve or to fix? The author Carol Weiss, who wrote about her own struggle with codependency, she realized for herself that it's actually about the relationship you have with yourself. She described it as a set of characteristics and patterns of behavior we develop to help us cope, typically from a childhood that revolve around, but not limited to, addiction, emotional instability and trauma, and physical or mental illness. And then also Darlene Lancer, a therapist, also wrote some well-known books on codependency, also follows the same line and saying that it is to her a disease of a lost self, which relate back to childhood shame and trauma when the core self, which they can't access, was concealed. Instead, codependent develop a persona in the world that reacts to others, to their own self-criticism, and to their imagined ideal of who they should be. So it's back to that tyranny of the should that Dr. Karen Horney described earlier in the 40s. So to me, to sum it all up, feeling like codependency at the heart of it It's really about a lack of a secure and authentic sense of self. If we do not look down at this core and just trying to deal with the addiction piece only or looking at through a medical lens, it might not really capture the root of the issue. So together, I put it into what I call the portrait of codependency, and it made up of four different pieces, four main pieces. The first one, of course, is addiction. And a lot of it has to believe that the addiction, either to substances, love, or certain patterns of behaviors, it's actually an escape tactics. You can say it's a defense mechanism so that if we're too busy tending to other people or dealing with all these external problems, then we don't have to deal and look at the pain, the unresolved pain and trauma that we still might be carrying from childhood. And you can also see the patterns of behaviors as a form of coping mechanism or a trauma response, right? Especially if you once grow up in a family that was not very validating, or supportive or even abusive. And codependency can be a way to kind of help one survive, right? So you think about where we have to take care of our own caretaker or parents, especially if they're struggling with addiction, mental illness, or otherwise unavailable to take care of us. And we should also look at the socialization piece as well. What messages, beliefs that we internalize from our family, our culture, and our religion. And that also play a huge factor in reinforcing this pattern in relationships. And lastly, I do believe that empathy and sensitivity for another person's pain and suffering is one of the strengths of somebody who can, you know, showcase codependent behaviors, but there is an imbalance in it. There tend to be a lot more empathy and sensitivity offered to another person versus be able to for oneself. And it happens very automatically. And you can see this in behaviors such as like immediately dismissing another person's poor behaviors or making excuses. It's just very, very automatic, and it's hard to even catch yourself. So it's just this imbalance of empathy and sensitivity. So on that note, we also needed to kind of discern between what is really true empathy, which I consider as healthy caretaking, versus codependency. And those two can easily get confused for one another. So to me, empathy is really when one is able to maintain a sense of oneself when helping another person, when being in that supportive role. But for codependency, it's when one can easily get enmeshed in and lose oneself in that caretaking role. So one of them is able to maintain a sense of self and the other one easily getting enmeshed. And this is due to where they see their sense of values and self-worth. Is it coming from within, like in people that can do embodied true empathy and able to self-validate themselves? They also have clear boundaries between self and other people that include on the level of emotionally, physically, mentally. So one doesn't easily absorb what's happening in the surroundings, take in those energies. You can also need to be comfortable being in solitude and also being in connection with another person. So, you're easily a lot more flexible going in between those two states. And also somebody with good, healthy caretaking capacity is able to feel and express their feelings and meet their own needs without excessively relying on others. Whereas for codependency, it's actually the opposite. You tend to look to other to validate their sense of self-esteem and self-worth. So it's like very externally focused. There's also a lack of boundaries, and you allow other people, their behaviors to affect their emotions and their actions. And those with codependency also is not very comfortable being alone, and they might fear abandonment, and especially when it's not needed. So there is a very strong need to be needed. And as far as being feelings and expressing their needs, they tend to feel disconnected from it or suppressing their feelings and needs for the sake of keeping peace in the relationship or appearing as good or being good. And notice the line can get blurred even if somebody do possess healthy caretaking skills. When under stress or if old wounds are being triggered, can very easily fall into the codependency patterns and get stuck in it. Another way one can see how these differences or when one can easily fall into the codependency trap is to check, the feelings and the behaviors and see if this is something that you can actually notice in yourself or other people. Some of the core feelings one might have would be, somebody who's highly codependent would feel a lot of anxiety and fear in relationship. Also, a lot of frustration, anger, resentment is a big one. There's also shame and inadequacy, guilt can be a lot of very overwhelming guilt, depression, low self-esteem, self-doubt, of course, easily stressed and burnt out, feeling stuck or imprisoned, powerless, helpless, victimized, empty, lost, and lonely. Now, of course, this isn't exclusive to codependent behaviors, but when these things kind of come together, you can feel a lot of it. It's good to pause and ask, hey, is the underlying pattern running me here? Is possibly be codependent? Especially if it couples with these types of behaviors, such as denial, minimizing, excusing, enabling another person's poor behaviors. This could be a way to manage your anxiety and your fear, because the truth might be a lot to bear at the moment and you can't handle it. And then also, jumping into doing composite rescuing, fixing, helping, caretaking wounded people. It's just almost this like drive, this urge to like, oh, let me help, let me fix. I know what to do. You jump right on it. And when it doesn't work, that can leave you feeling frustrated and angry and a lot of resentment if the other person doesn't listen to you, doesn't do as you tell them how to take care of themselves. So there could be a lot of frustration and resentment built up there. Of course, there's poor boundaries and lack of self-care, extreme self-sacrificing behaviors, feeling like a martyr, tend to overfunction in relationship by being overly responsible for other people's needs, feelings, and emotions. And that can look like people-pleasing or controlling behaviors. In essence, it's just a case of just doing too much and trying too hard, either to fit in, be liked, be needed, accepted, while neglecting one's own needs. And doing so, you tend to lose themselves in the relationship, right? Like, especially after a breakup or divorce, you suddenly find yourself, you're like, I don't know who I am. So that could definitely be a sign of looking into potentially having codependency patterns. So let's talk about this is a cultural difference or unhealthy behavior, because some of the discussion around it could be like, well, does this only apply to Western culture? Because it is a Western concept, or at least it was conceived by Western thoughts, versus comparing it to Eastern culture, which kind of have a total different orientation. So are we just being unfairly pathologizing other cultures, norms, and practices? So let's look at a couple of factors and decide if it is or it isn't. So in Western culture, there tend to be more emphasis on developing an independent, individualistic sense of self, right? The I am and how I am unique, how am I different than you, that tend to be more emphasis to, and success is about standing. It's to be what makes you special. versus in Eastern culture, the emphasis is on interdependent, relational, and having a collective sense of self and how well you actually fit together into your family unit, your culture, your society, right? And that sense of self, it depends on your role relationship to other people, especially those closest to you, like family members, your personal attachment to them. So it's like, parent and child, husband and wife, siblings, that sort of thing. So it's less likely that they think in terms of I, but more in terms of us and we. And the group, I think, with benefits would usually place above the individual needs and wants. And then we got to look at how self-worth is being defined. And, is it tied to meeting a certain social or gender role expectations? Right? Like I know in Eastern culture, it's very common to parentify eldest children, especially eldest daughters, to teach them how to take care of the younger siblings. They're almost acting like a surrogate mom or second mother in the household. And that is coming from the difference in socialization of girls and boys, where girls are taught at a young age to prepare them for marriage, for motherhood. So then they tend to having to carry a lot more of the burden of the caretaking role. And that almost seems like second nature. Nobody really question it. It's just what you do because you were born a certain birth order and this is your gender. Mothers are also expected to be all self-sacrificing. Just you always have to put your family needs first, your husbands, your kids, your parents, your parents-in-law, to take care of all of that above oneself. And so that's considered something that's a virtuous in a woman, especially in a mother. And then, of course, kids, they are required to become, be obedient and dutiful, right? And that's considered meeting the specific social and gender roles expectations. If not, then one might get shamed or feel guilty about it. So it kind of puts you on track to really place your self-worth and your value to external sources versus internal. And we also have to look at the concept of boundaries and power dynamic in relationships. In Eastern culture, there's a very clear power hierarchy, very rigid, with physical boundaries based upon age, gender, and social status. But when it comes to mental, emotional, and psychological boundaries between family members and significant others, it's very hazy. It tends to be non-existent. This is why it feels very natural for parents to kind of share marital issues and problems with their children, especially young children. They don't see much of it, right? It's like, well, you're part of the family and you're here and you're supposed to be my support group, without really thinking about, is this really appropriate for the child, and especially at their age. So those things generally don't cross their mind too much. And one can say, is that really healthy? And now I'm not saying that in Western culture, these concepts aren't important, but in Eastern one, I've seen it heavily stressed, right? Such thing as reciprocity of give and take in terms of gift giving. There's also fear and indebtedness. So you have to, whatever you receive, you got to give back an equal value or even above that, right? You don't want to owe anybody anything, or at least that was what I was taught. There's also the issue of losing faith and filial piety. Every children kind of get instilled with that as a young age. So all of these factors together causes one to can definitely show an overly concern about other people's well-being, especially one's parents, one's family members, their opinions, beliefs, and ideas, and place that above one's own needs or one's own feelings and intuition. And this serves as a way to help protect and maintain the relationship. Even sometimes, we might have to overlook certain dysfunctional qualities within it. So yeah, I can't say, only you would know what kind of impact it has in your life and whether or not you resonate with it and whether it rings true to you in your own culture and your upbringing. So we've been talking so much about it. Another thing I want to clarify would be interdependence. Hear that a lot too about it. And so sometimes the healing path we talk about is how can we break free from codependency to something that's a little healthier and balanced, such as called interdependence. So let's say we'll start out in the unhealthy codependent area there, which we talked about a lot already. So I'm not going to repeat that. And then let's say you realize you recognize these patterns, you want it to change. The next step, it'll be very easy to fall into what I call unhealthy independence. So you go and overshoot it, overcorrect it to the other side, where now there's too much self and not enough respect for the others. And then boundaries, you learn how to set boundaries, but then it's very rigid and inflexible. So, or you might want to become the superhero, right? Where we want to do everything without seeking help or support. So become a bit out of balance there. Or you would flip-flop between the two, depending on what's going on. So that's one process of the healing journey. And then you start recognizing it's probably not a good idea. You might learn to be like, okay, how can I actually now develop healthy independence where, you can still value autonomy, authenticity, and start building up a strong sense of self, cultivating stronger inner resources and strength to help you solve problems so you don't need to be so dependent on others. But that's also a process in itself. And this is because this step, it's part of a developmental stage during healthy adolescence and young adulthood. But let's say if you grew up in a very traumatic, chaotic family settings, and you don't really have chance or encouragement to develop this, and sometimes in very controlling environment as well, where independence or forming one's own agency can feel very threatening to the parents or the family structure, then that can get suppressed or shamed. So have to break through that and moving into a healthier way of embodying independence and learning those skill sets is also can be a difficult step as well. And then from there, one can learn how to develop healthy dependency, right? Where you can feel freely receiving help without feeling shame. And you know when to reach out for support and recognizing when it's okay to have needs and these things are valid. And learning how to feel safe, to be vulnerable, and to connect in that way. So when you're able to actually get a sense and developing the skills to be both demonstrating self-agency, self-reliance, but also have the skill set to be vulnerable with others and being in relationship, then you're at a very good place to now truly developed interdependence, where now there is a balance, give and take without shame or guilt. You're able to recognize and show respect for other people's differences. Your boundaries is clear, but also flexible, not rigid like before when, you'd be like in the unhealthy independent stage. There's also a lot of comfort with open and honest dialogue. You're apt to more able to share responsibility versus before where one person take on all the responsibility and another person just completely abandoned it, abdicate it. You also have healthy balance between offering and seeking support when needed. And this is generally good, of course, in adulthood. And that's what we ultimately want. And have that in any of our relationship in our lives and work as well. Okay, so today's reflection question are, again, this is totally optional if you wanted to do it. Good to like kind of journal it out, draw, and see whatever comes up for you. The first question is, how did you become aware of codependency and what does it mean to you? Where do you see codependency patterns in your life, either in the past or in the present? And what about in your family of origin or the AAPI community? What messages or beliefs from your upbringing do you think contributed to the development and maintenance of codependency? And how did that help or hurt you in your life, work, and relationship? And lastly, what helpful messages do you have for yourself or other people whom you see struggling with codependency? All right. So that is the prompt for tonight. If you do answer any of these questions, please let me know down in the comments below if you watch this on a replay. And yeah, I hope to hear from you. I hope this has been helpful and insightful. Let me know what you think. Thank you. Thank you for coming.